Well, good morning, you all, and thank you all for being here. And welcome to day two of Medicines from the Earth. So I'm Mark Blumenthal. The reason that I chose this topic is because as of this month, so we're the third day of June, 2023. Herbalgram has become 40 years old as of this month. And I'll show that in a moment. So I don't have any copies of Herbalgram with me to hand out as inducements for you to come or leave, but there's some here. And we sent for this conference, by the way, our special issue that we published last year with that features the photography of the late great Stephen Foster. So there's copies of that. I invite you to take a copy or two if you want to take it. So, and for the sake of the PowerPoint, most of my PowerPoint are visual with very little text. So those of you who are looking at this online someday, you're just going to see a lot of pictures, without much text. Okay, so obligatory. I was required in my contract. Exactly. And the theme of it is information or the lack thereof, and the lack of knowledge. And culturally and intellectually, people just don't know enough about plants. That's the message here. People don't get it, right? And as a matter of fact, I was been thinking about doing a class action lawsuit against Costco, because I go there and I buy these big bags of what they say gourmet wild bird seed, and it's mislabeled. In my opinion, and the lawsuit will say, it should say gourmet wild squirrel and bird seed. So it's mislabeled, because if you look at who's eating most of the seed, 80% in our house, and anyway, is squirrels. Again, in the area and domain of information, we have challenges on how we live in an information society. What kind of information do we access? What kind of information from an epistemological perspective do we recognize as being truthful or true? And what is truth? And how do we know what we know, etc.? But I know that we don't want to get too heady about it. So just to get clear and get our location coordinates clear here, I like to remember who we are and where we are. And this is from the James Webb scope, which if you're not watching some of the feeds, you're missing out. There's some great stuff going on online from NASA and the James Webb scope. So just to get clear about where we are, but it's about the plants. So this conference is about the plants. So to start off with Herbalgram, I want to share with you what Herbalgram and ABC are and what we do, and then the rest of the talk will pretty much be how we got to this point and what we're doing in some areas to enhance the issues regarding authenticity of botanical material in the marketplace and the sustainable sourcing and development of those. So that's the main thesis. But just these are some of the logos for the key projects and programs and publications at ABC. And so here we go. So this is our 35th year of ABC. We'll have our 35th birthday on Halloween or All Saints Day. We were incorporated on All Saints Day, not because it was All Saints Day, but just because it was easy for me to go down to the Secretary of State and file for corporation. This is our 40th anniversary of Herbalgram as of this week. And we just published a few months ago our 9,000th herb clip. I'll a little more about that in a moment. We have about 75 herbs that have been adopted on our robust and unique HerbMed Pro database. We have 80 peer-reviewed publications in our Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program. More about that in a moment. We have members in over 80 countries in the world. So even though we're the American Botanical Council, we are an international organization. And if I were starting ABC today, knowing where it would have gone as it has the last 35 years, I would probably not choose American Botanical Council. I would choose global or intergalactic or some other more appropriate terminology. But actually, the name American Botanical Council happened because when I was starting the organization, I figured, the name of the organization, the acronym, should be as easy to remember as ABC. American Botanical Committee, Commission, Consortium, Council. Okay, that's it. And so people still come up to me today and say, how are things at the American Botanical Society? Okay. Our key publication, again, there's copies here available somewhere. I just got here last night, so I'm sorry I don't know where. Our key founding premise, and I'll show you how we got there, is Herbalgram. And we are a totally unique publication. We're peer-reviewed like a scientific journal. We cover some of the content that you would find in some trade publications, and we have graphic layout that is more consumer-oriented. So we're a very unique kind of hybrid publication. There's nothing like it in the world. Everything we publish is extensively peer-reviewed, and some of the articles we publish go up to 10, 12, 15,000 words, including references. So they're seminal articles that are often cited by others and stimulate others. We have a monthly newsletter called Herbal Egram that comes out to our members every month. And then we have a weekly newsletter that goes out to about 40,000 ABC members and registered users of our unique website called Herbal News and Events, where we aggregate conferences, webinars, symposia around the world on herbs, medicinal plants, fungi, teas, essential oils, and related natural medicine and other types of research type things, as well as some of the latest articles from the last weeks, 6 or 8 articles from the last weeks, and every week Herbal News and Events. And that's free. Anybody can just register on our site and get Herbal News and Events, and it's a gold mine of information. Herb Clip, as I mentioned, we just published our 9,000th, and these are like 2 to 3 page, mostly peer-reviewed summaries of mostly clinical literature. And this does not include, we don't do chemistry, we don't do pharmacology, we don't do in vitro studies. There's thousands of those published every year. We focus on human clinical studies, just humans, not lawyers. We just deal with, or systematic reviews of the published clinical studies or the meta-analyses of these systematic reviews. And something that ABC has always done for 30, 35 years, as part of our style sheet, part of our policies, we mention the actual specific phytomedicinal material, commercial product used in that clinical study, or if it's not a product, if it's an ingredient, like say pycnogenol. I'm not here to promote them. I'm just saying that's a branded, patented ingredient that is chemically defined, clinically studied. We mention the actual product used in that study and the name of the company. And the reason for that is to give health professionals, researchers, and others guidance as to what this study is about and what the limitations of this study is about, and that it may not apply to generic garlic or generic ginger that you buy out of the store. This is a special ginseng or ginger or rhodiola extract or whatever it is. It's specific to this product. And sometimes that can be genericized and sometimes it cannot be, because the products and or the ingredients can often be chemically defined. And of course, as we know from our knowledge of herbs, we're dealing with a lot of chemistry here that can be very variable.
Would you like a study, Vincent?
Oh,
just to move the PowerPoint forward, so you can walk around if you want to take the mic off the stand.
But then I would lose. Then I'd have to hold the mic in one hand and this in the other.
Yeah.
Then
Do you not want it?
Yeah, I'll hold it.
All right. Let me just plug this in, and I think that should be all you need.
They're plugging in the remote control.
Yeah. Let's see if it works.
Let's see if I work.
Great.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Chris. Right. Yay for Chris. Yay for the AV guy. The only AV guy I've ever met that is not wearing all black. You ever notice that they always wear all black? The AV guy. You can always tell at a conference at the hotel who the AV guys are. They're either all black or if they're from New York, one of the two, right? Because that's the New Yorker's biggest existential dilemma, right? They wake up every morning looking in their closet trying to decide what shade of black to wear. Okay. Gets worse. Okay. So our unique HerbMed Pro database, which basically takes all of the PubMed, the publicly accessible abstracts on a specific herb or fungus or whatever product, and organizes it in a very logical, easy to find fashion. And then if you look at, let's say here, we have ginkgo. You can't see on the, let's say ginkgo, and it says ginkgo trials, 445 in parentheses. That means there's 445 ginkgo trials as of April 2022 when I did the screen grab. There's more now. And if you want to look at the clinical trials, you click on the ginkgo, and then we go to one-sentence summaries of each of those 445 clinical trials. And we have one-sentence summaries of every one of these pharmacological, toxicological, chemical, and or clinical trials on each of these 265 herbs. So you can go down to these one-sentence summaries that we distill, we condense it down, and then there's a link to the PubMed abstract or wherever the abstract is for that. So it's a very quick, easy, rational, robust way to do research on those herbs. We're able to do this because certain companies adopt the herb in question that they may have a commercial interest in. So we are grateful to the adopters, and we have, like I said, close to 75 or 80 herbs that are adopted. We have the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program, which I'll talk more about later, but this is one of the programs that we started almost 13 years ago, and I will get more into that and why we do it and what the point of that is, because bottom line is we're very concerned about authenticity in the herbal marketplace, not just in the United States, but globally, because ever since the beginning of commerce, ever since the beginning of human society, people have cheated, unfortunately. I won't say it's part of human nature, but it's part of the way some people act in the cultural context. And again, and we also have the Sustainable Herbs Program, which is almost 5 years old now, that deals with sustainable production and accessing of herbs from their source through what is often called the supply chain, that we prefer to call the value network, because herb supply chains are not always linear, as supply chain would imply. It's a very root-like system where there's multiple areas of waves and routes that the material comes to. It's one central source sometimes. So we prefer to call that a network. And we use the word value to honor the people involved at source and throughout along the network or the value chain. As Chris was talking about so eloquently last night from so much of his experience, Chris Killam, who's in the audience right now, who spoke on these kinds of subjects last night. So let's talk about the origin and history of ABC and its programs, some of which started from the Herb Trade Association back in 1976, the American Herbal Products Association in 1992, and the Herb Research Foundation also in 1980. Did I say 92? I meant 82, 1982. So back in the 76, I had a herb company called Sweetheart Herbs. It was a wholesale herb company. And after a couple of years in that area, I got together with some of my friends and colleagues and competitors at the time, and we were all very collegial, and it was a small little industry at the time, even though it's an ancient industry. Some people say that herb trading is the world's second oldest profession. And we said, hey, we need to have a conversation and a group and a community so that we can develop ways to communicate, agree on standards, nomenclature, government regulations, whatever, at that time, 1976, which is what, 47 years ago, 47 years ago. So during that time, I was president in 1979, the third president of HTA. And by the way, HTA, it was mainly hippies and Mormons from the Salt Lake City area. That was the herb trade primarily, because they were really into it. And the hippies did not want to invest all of the power of the presidency in one person. So we set up a troika based on the communist style of a troika. And we had a tri-presidential first year, which was Carolyn McDougall of Celestial Seasoning. She's the owner of Ticino today. Wonderful, incredible woman. Great product, caffeine-free teas and et cetera. Ticino. The late Ben Zeracor of the Famali Company, and the late Barry Meltzer of San Francisco Herb Company. So there was three presidents of HTA the first year. Then John Hay of Celestial Seasonings was president the second year, and I was president the third year in 1979. When I was president, we started producing this newsletter called Herb News, which evolved into a magazine for several years called Herb News. before we started, and the Herb Trade Association went down in 1981 under somebody else's hands. And then we started APA, the American Herbal Products Association. Some of the same group that was part of the Herb Trade Association, we recoalesced in the Phoenix flight that came out of the ashes of the HTA, became APA. And while I was a founding board member of APA, the American Herbal Products Association, with Rob McCaleb at Celestial Seasonings, we started the Herb Research Foundation as well. And under the aegis of these groups, I started Herbalgram, and I branded it as Herb News Herbalgram so we could try to take the goodwill that we generated with the previous publication that I produced for HTA. And that was the first Herbalgram there on the left, and the latest issue on the right, issue number 137. So you can see that the news back in the day for Herbalgram. So the first news item was Herb Trade Association is defunct. That's been happening now for a year. In case you didn't know it, the organization that you used to belong to isn't happening anymore. And now we have a new organization, and it's called, and here's Rob and I. And so my hat off to Rob McCaleb, former lab director at Celestial Seasonings, a wonderful guy, and really the founding impetus for the Herb Research Foundation organization. I also want to throw a hat out to Barbara Johnston, BJ, who was our managing editor at Herbalgram for 17 years. She passed about 5 years ago. Amazing woman and dear friend. And she's the one that produced on her Mac 2, her Apple II, was that whatever they called it at that time, the little box that, used to go, the first one was on a typewriter. Right? We did it at a typewriter, and we took it. And back then, by the way, we took the Herbalgram to the printer, and they printed 300 copies, and they collated it, and they stapled it, and then we folded it, and we stuck it in an envelope, and we addressed the envelope, and then we stuck it through the postage meter, because we didn't have email, we didn't have internet. The internet was there. It was the ARPANET. It was for Defense Department and university, but there was no World Wide Web. We didn't have fax machines. Some of the guys who were into international trade had telex machines, if you ever heard of the telex machine back in the early 80s, late 70s, but we didn't have all this electronic environment. It was printed and mailed, literally. And then for the natural products trade shows out in California every year, that happens around March or so, every year in March, I would put together an issue of Verbalgram, which would be send-ups of the industry and send-ups of the community, and some cartoons and some good times. And my favorite one was when the Satanic Verses was popular, and Salman Rushdie had been fatwad, into obscurity or into fame, but he had to kind of hide because he was considered an apostate. We did the Botanic Verses with the same logo. Okay, so that's, yes, FDA came down on the spice from space. There's the Botanic Verses. There it is, right there. You see it? It's like, anyway. Straight from the cover of the supermarket tabloids stuff. Okay. So we started ABC in 1983 as a way, this was Herbalgram. But then after 5 years of producing Herbalgram and 17 issues of Herbalgram, I decided I wanted to go full time because I'd been in the herb business. I was doing consulting. I was doing insulting, whatever I could do to get, I was a freelance writer writing for various trade publications and East-West Journal, which became Natural Health and New Age Journal, and I would write articles, for a couple $100, whatever you could get, back then. It was a lot of money back then, 10 cents a word. Hey, you wanted to be as wordy as possible. And hopefully you didn't have a good editor. Mark Bittman was one of my editors at East-West, when Mark Bittman, the famous food writer. And we both had MB as our initials, so we got together and had a good time with it. And we were both vegetarians at the time. I still am. So I started ABC as a vehicle to take Herbalgram, this newsletter I was doing for Herb Research Foundation and APA, and take it to another level. I had a vision of taking Herbalgram into a Scientific American kind of visual. and credibility. And the idea was to help create more credibility, because herbs were like the Rodney Dangerfield of medicine, because nobody could give it any respect. Can't get no respect, right? My favorite Rodney Dangerfield. I can't get no respect. I mean, the hotel I stayed at last night was so cheap. When I checked out, they stole my towel. Or the one he says, my wife, she loves to make love in the back seat while I'm driving. So we started, here we go, not working. All right. So we started ABC, and the idea was to create a logo that would have resonance, relevance, and educational value. And Stephen Foster and I, of blessed memory, and I'll be mentioning Stephen numerous times, a brother and a supporter and a partner, and who's gone now. But Stephen and I came up with the idea of using echinacea. And at that time, echinacea outside the herbal community was not very well known. It was not a household word in the culture. We wanted to take echinacea and take it to the next level. Stephen had written the first book on echinacea in modern times since John Irby Lloyd's book back in 1920 or so. So it was like in 50 or 60 years, he was the first book available on echinacea. So echinacea, for obvious reasons, native to North America, was one of the most valued botanicals by the Plains Indians. The safety is well established. There's scientific research. One of the species in the genus, or two of them, were federally listed endangered species, Echinacea tennesseeensis. It's easy to grow. It's got beautiful, purple coneflower, beautiful aesthetic gardener's appeal. There's a whole lot of good reasons why to choose of all herbs, and there's lots of wonderful herbs we could choose from, but echinacea was the one. And here's the echinacea that Dr. Dennis Owain, the late Dr. Dennis Owain, dear friend, who was also not just a chemist, but a natural product chemist, and a regulator in Canada, did this one, and this is on the back door. At ABC, the side door. This is our logo done in stained glass by Dennis Owain. Okay, but we are a science organization. The whole function of ABC was to be a science organization. Let's focus on the science, right? So, because again, herbs were not getting respect where they needed to get respect. And what was happening is there was a growing body of clinical literature emerging out of Europe, primarily Germany, but other parts of Europe, where they had a different perspective and cultural connection to herbs than we have over here, especially at the time. And we were one of the first, if not the first, to come over to systematically report on European phytomedicinal research at a clinical level, because they were just unknown. And you would hear doctors and scientists saying, yes, but there's no science on this stuff. Well, actually, yes, there is. The problem is you just haven't seen it. And so, because understandably, it's not being served up. So part of our job, part of our main mission as a science-based education organization, 501c3, nonprofit, tax exempt, we can take your donations, they're tax deductible. And it was that nobody was systematically or even unsystematically reporting on this stuff, and people just didn't know. It was ignorance of the fact that it was there. So you had the ignorance of the science because the system wasn't delivering it. We became the first part of the system, if you will, or the non-system that reported the science and continues to report on the science. So Herbalgram, in a sense then, as part of ABC, and it was the basic reason for ABC, the reason we started ABC initially was that we could have a nonprofit platform to take Herbalgram to another level. At the same time, I didn't want to be beholden to my advertisers if I were to have advertisers, and initially we didn't have advertisers. I didn't want to be under the political or economic or commercial thumbscrew pressure of advertisers saying, well, we're going to drop our ad if you publish this article or whatever, which happens in trade consumer publications. Advertisers influence the content often. It's not rocket science to know that. They do that on television as well. So that's why you don't see a lot of hard-hitting news reports about the problems associated in the pharmaceutical industry, because they are dependent on the billions of dollars that are spent by the pharmaceutical industry for advertising. Just look at cable news. How much of that news is brought to you by the pharmaceutical industry? And I'm not an anti-pharmaceutical guy. There's a place for pharmaceuticals, but there's also a rightful and righteous place for herbs, and especially those that have been scrutinized through appropriate science and appropriate technology, etc., for their role, not just historically and ethnobotanically and culturally, but their role today. And we don't necessarily validate herbs because we have clinical trials on them, because after all, herbs didn't just start working with the advent of the randomized controlled trial in the 1950s and 60s. Herbs have always worked. And my favorite bumper sticker, if I were to make one, is just herbs work, period. It's just that just says it right there. And yet, at the same time, we felt compelled to bring that information in a way that would be palatable to and understandable to a body of health professionals and other researchers, etc. This is just a snapshot of the type of programs that by 2001, after 13 years of ABC, by 2001, the different publications and programs that began through ABC that are basically the genesis, or the Herbalgram was the foundational energy for, and there's a lot of it. It's just a bunch of. I don't want to get into reading all of my slides here. You can see there's a whole lot of stuff there, and there's more since then. And some of those projects and programs we're not doing anymore. Things have evolved in 35 years, of course, and hopefully. And yet, the fact of the matter is, all this started with an 8-page newsletter in 1983 to let people know what's going on with research and with media, to the extent there was any media, very little, with government and regulation, what's going on in the industry. 8 pages, then 12 pages, then 16 pages, then 24 pages, from the local print shop to the place where we had to fold them and spindle fold and mutilate them and mail them. Remember that? Do not spindle, fold, or mutilate. No? I always wondered what the spindle meant. Why? What does spindle mean? Why? And it was the spike. The spike, exactly. It was the spike that people had on their desk, and they would take the paper and stick it on the spindle so the paper wouldn't blow away with the fans that were, or whatever. I don't know. It's like the office of the 30s, right? It's 100 years ago almost. Okay, so one of the first things we did when we started ABC, besides helped promote Herbalgram, Stephen and I said, there's all this literature. And Stephen, you and I know about this literature, but a lot of people don't. So instead of trying to create new literature, which we are doing also, let's go get permission from these professors like Schultes and Farnsworth and Jim Duke and Vero Tyler and all these people. Let's go get permission from them and their publishers in their various journals and book chapters and get permission to reprint this material as classic botanical reprints, because this material was really good about the ethnobotany, ethnopharmacology, the role of herbs the role that medicinal plants play in therapy as conventional medicines, that 25% of the modern drugs at that time came from plants. There's this paper called Medicinal Plants and Therapy from the Bulletin of the World Health Organization, written by Professor Farnsworth and his group at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And it showed the 119 modern drugs that are derived directly from plants. And 79% of them correlate directly with their historical use in ethnobotany. It's not a stretch when you're doing drug discovery. And ABC is also not just about dietary supplements and teas and fungal products, etc., sold as supplements, but we're also about drug discovery, development of modern pharmaceutical drugs from plants and or fungi from natural sources. That's just as legitimate as anything else that we're doing. So we published 4 different volumes of these classic botanical reprints. And here's some of them that I mentioned. And the idea was to give people very quickly the case for herbal medicine, the case for using medicinal plants as leads for modern drugs, etc., because we were straddling both of those worlds. And it made sense. And then I said to Stephen, we keep getting these calls from the media, and they're asking questions about ginseng and ginger and echinacea and ginkgo, and they don't know. Let's produce some broadsides. Let's do 1 or 2 page broadsides, which basically gives people like mini monographs. And out of that conversation, we developed like 15 or 16 of these botanical booklets, these little 8-page botanical booklets with 4-color covers that's of Stephen Foster's beautiful top photography. This is 1991. And we printed 10,000 copies of each of these booklets, and we sold them in racks in health food stores, and we basically gave them to health food stores, and we gave them to journalists. In other words, people would say, well, what can you tell us about milk thistle? Let us send this to you. And we mailed it to them. We didn't have email until 1998, so we were mailing this stuff to them in the snail mail. But it was basically peer-reviewed content, all referenced about the history, the pharmacology, the botany, the history, and the modern scientific research as it was available at that time. And we seeded people in the media, S-E-E-D, seeded, and from that, we generated dozens and dozens, hundreds of articles that came out in the consumer press, popular press, etc. We also started carrying other books from other publishers and from other organizations, mainly the books that are dealing with the technical textbook type books, the books that are $89 to $389 back in the day. And eventually we had like over 400 books and monographs and CDs in our catalog, our book catalog, which was actually eventually became a tear out, stapled in, tipped in our magazine. It was like a 16 or 32 page catalog that we published thousands of copies of, tens of thousands of copies of. And we sold these mainly high-end technical reference books, textbooks, because people didn't know these were available. And people all over the world, before Amazon came along, we were selling thousands and thousands of dollars of books per month. It was a great profit center, but we didn't intend it that way. It happened. It grew that way. And Professor Farnsworth, Dr. Norman Farnsworth, said that just reading our book catalog was an education into itself. Just seeing the breadth and the depth of the quality of the types of books that we're offering that are available in the world, that people had no idea where are they going to go. There was nothing like this. And then eventually Amazon took over all the sales of books, and trying to compete with Amazon became a fool's errand, and we got out of the book business. But we still published our own books. And in 1998, we published what probably was one of our most famous books, which is the Complete German Commissioning Monographs, because we had spent 5 years translating what the German government had done that no other government had done, especially a Western government, where they took a division of what we would call the Food and Drug Administration. Over there, it's called something else. And the Commission E, there's a Commission D, a Commission B. There's different commissions, Commission C, but the Commission E were experts, physicians, pharmacists, pharmacologists, pharmacognosists with expertise in medicinal plants, and they reviewed all of the available evidence, scientific and otherwise, available on all the drugs, herbal drugs sold in German pharmacies as medicines, and determined which ones that had adequate scientific basis for safety and benefit for at least one claimed benefit, because these were herbal drugs sold in German pharmacies. And the Commission E monographs became, in effect, package inserts. They were published in the German Federal Register as package inserts and guidelines for pharmacists and physicians as to what they could claim for this particular herbal drug, sold as a medicine, not as a dietary supplement, which is a food item. That was the point. And we brought it to the table. We started this project before the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act was passed. We started the project. It wasn't published till afterwards, because people were going, okay, we understand vitamin A and vitamin B and vitamin C and the relative safety, but what about all these herbs? What is this stuff? And are they safe? Because the biggest question that people in the health professionals kept raising, and congressional people, are these herbs safe? And we brought the Commission E conversation, showing that the German government's own expert committee has reviewed these, and here's the ones they say have enough data to show the data of safety, what Dr. Tyler called a doctrine of reasonable certainty for safety, and a presumption that there's enough data to support a certain claim. So there was a certain rationality behind all that. based on the commissioning while we were doing it, and along with our friends at Pharmavite, which is a mass market-based company that sells dietary supplements, we developed the first pharmacy continuing education courses on herbal medicine in the United States, based on the fact that the German government had already done a lot of this work. Why don't we use that as a basis to inform pharmacists? I mean, if it's good enough for German doctors and pharmacists, why isn't it good enough over here? And our pharmacists had at that time, had still been required to take at least 1 or 2 semesters of pharmacognosy, which is now virtually almost extinct in the 75 or 80, how many there are now, pharmacy schools in the United States. In 2003, we published our book, Clinical Herbs, ABC Clinical Guide to Herbs, on 29 of the most popular herbal products in the marketplace. There's your therapeutic monographs where we specifically mention the actual names of the products in each of the clinical studies that we summarize. This is the first, and this book was simultaneously accredited for physicians, pharmacists, nurses, dietitians, and naturopaths for CE credit. And after the passing of Professor Tyler in 2001, I was fortunate to be invited to help be the English editor and reviser of this book, which was the textbook used in German schools of medical schools and pharmacy schools. This is one of the textbooks, Rational Phytotherapy, a reference guide for physicians and pharmacists. This is the 5th edition. In 2004, it was the last one that was done, and I'm the English editor and the person who revised it. We also published a book with the Missouri Botanical Garden on plant identification, showing with very excellent line drawings how to identify plants in the field and microscopically, and this is macroscopic identification for people in the field to be able to be I think 119 plants. We have, because I was a professor in the pharmacy school, we have a preceptor position with the University of Texas College of Pharmacy and also Texas State University Dietetic Association, and we have pharmacy and dietetic interns that come to ABC. We still have the internship program going on. It's been about 25 years or whatever we've been. So we've really had the opportunity to impact hundreds of dietitians and pharmacists with information at our 2.5-acre homestead, where we are, historic homestead, where they learn about growing medicinal plants and harvesting something that's ripe and creating some kind of preparation, whether it's edible or external, and they have to do a presentation on the material that they have harvested and produced, and the research on it, etc. We are also a major supplier of herbal information for the media. I mentioned some of that. So we basically help generate science-based information that's credible, authoritative, responsible to the media. One of our most popular programs were our Pharmacy from the Rainforest Ethnobotany Eco Tours that Jim Duke and I and others, Mary Hardy and a whole bunch of us, our faculty, would take pharmacists and physicians to the Peruvian rainforest to see which plants are used by local people as food and which ones are used as medicine, and some of them which are the source of modern pharmaceutical drugs. And then we also went to Machu Picchu as well. And then eventually we expanded this to Belize, Costa Rica. We did one in Kenya, one in South Africa, and even did one in Germany when 9/11 happened. I came back right before 9/11. Jim Duke was part of the extension down to Munich from that, and he was the one who ended up, and people couldn't fly back because there was a no-fly zone going on all over the world, the Western world, and Jim ended up for 4 or 5 days with a bunch of pharmacists and doctors in a hotel in Munich, not knowing what to do, and it really wasn't. Jim's job was to talk about the plants, but his job wasn't about to be the nurse mother to everybody, so it was a difficult challenge for him and everyone else. So in the Amazon, we brought people down there to help them get a new perspective on their lives, as well as a new perspective on where plants come from in medicine. So just a few shots here from some of that. And the idea is that we respect and really relish ethnobotany and the history of herbs in medicine, and how people have used plants historically, and how they've learned from their grandmother's grandmother's grandmother to the nth power backwards. And at the same time, as Chris mentioned last night in his presentation, And this is from Time Magazine back in 1998, I think, or so. A lot of these people and these cultures are dying, and a lot of the information. I think it was Mark Plotkin who once said that when one of these old men or women die with all this herbal knowledge, it's like a whole library burning down. And the idea is to keep going out there. This is a picture of Chris in the Amazon. We took. You didn't know we were out there with a camera, did you? You had no idea. It's before the iPhone. Okay, so let's look at some Herbalgram's covers to show where we've been. We have 137. I don't want to go through all of them. Again, a shout out and honor and a tip of the hat to late great Stephen Foster. I believe we have published 66 or 67 Herbalgram covers with his photography on it, and almost every issue of Herbalgram, starting in around Herbalgram 25 or so, when we start using photography, contains his incredible photography. So just some of the ways that we have used Stephen's photos in Herbalgram, often very plant-centric, which may or may not reflect the key, one or more of the key articles in that issue. Sometimes they are reflective, as in this case with ginseng. More about that in a moment. Here's one on kava, which contained a 24-page review article that Dr. Yadu Singh and I wrote based on his incredible article in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology. We revised it. We have photos of, the Queen Elizabeth in I think it was in Fiji or in Samoa receiving kava, and the Pope in Samoa or Vanuatu receiving kava as their gift, honoring somebody. It's a reverence. We produced a lot of this information to help generate more interest in kava. This was in 1997, I believe. So we were part of, along with Bill and Peggy Brevoort, we were part of the energy that helped stimulate interest in the industry and beyond the industry in the medicinal and traditional ethnobotanical historical uses of kava. Chris was using kava by that time probably too, right? And Chris has done probably as much or more than anybody in North America to get people to recognize the legitimate and safe and reasonable and appropriate uses of kava. We helped introduce rhodiola to the market about 20 years ago with a cover story on Herbalgram. It's a cover story on a golden seal and its safety, its future from a sustainability perspective. Ginkgo, we did a review article on healthy adults showing that ginkgo can be used to help increase mental performance. It's not just dealing with dementia and some adverse conditions or irregularities, but at the same time, ginkgo can be utilized proactively. St. John's wort, the first of Roy Upton's wonderful series of close to 40 now, I think it is, best in the world monographs from the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia. The very first monograph that Roy published was St. John's wort. We helped him edit it, we formatted it, we published it for him as a way to help get him and move him forward. It was our way of being our brother's keeper, because we are our brother and our sister's keeper, etc. And our dogs and our cats. And a lot on St. John's, Saw Palmetto. We helped introduce more information on rooibos, etc. And then sometimes we would have a whole series, occasionally, not always repeatedly, but over the years, articles on conservation and sustainability. Here's one on lady slipper. And the interesting thing is, this one on lady slipper in Herbalgram in 2021, Herbalgram 131, the article on the left, Herbalgram 115 in 1988, we talked about the fact that Herbalgram was being CITES listed. We went to APA and other organizations to say there's no point, there's no reason, there's no justification for the herb industry to be selling lady slipper. At that time, and back in the day when I had my herb company in the 70s, it was very commonly traded. If you look at these companies that supplied botanicals, yellow lady slipper root or pink lady slipper root, it was just lady slipper, was sold as a sedative herb, or it was sold with lady slipper with hops, valerian, skullcap, and some of your sedative and unnerving herbs. It was a common, relatively common ingredient. We went to the industry and we said, this is a no-no. We should not, and these are lady slipper harvested in the United States, mainly in the Southeast and Appalachian area. We said, we shouldn't do this. And the very first trade recommendation that the American Herbal Products Association, to their credit, did was to basically try to ban, and they didn't have the authority to ban, but just tell their members, you shouldn't be selling lady slipper. And within a few years, suppliers and manufacturers removed lady slipper from herbal products made in the United States. You don't see it anymore for good reason, because it's endangered basically. And we have other herbs that are just as good or better. We don't need it. But we were generators of that conversation. Golden seal, I mentioned it. It was CITES listed in 1997 as a threatened, not endangered species. We had put an article about that by Joy Bannerman and Herbalgram back there on the left. And then about 22 years later, we said, let's look and see what kind of population biology and information is available now, 20 some odd years later, on the current viability of golden seal. And we did this cover story showing what was then and what is now. And let's revisit this conversation, because it's not just a one-off, it's an ongoing process. We have featured various places that are in peril of development, that are unique places. This is a place in British Columbia, the Stoltman Wilderness. In 2009, we published the very first article that dealt with the question, what's going to happen with global warming and the future of medicinal plants? How is global warming going to affect the future of medicinal and aromatic plants? MAPS is the acronym used in the trade, medicinal and aromatic plants. What's going to happen with climate change impacting medicinal plants, ? And we had 13 experts that we interviewed, and this was in 2009. So in 2019, I said, it's been 10 years since we did that. We should take another look at this. And by that time, we weren't saying ? We're calling it the climate crisis. We're calling it what it is in Herbalgram in 2019. And the entire issue was devoted to this question and this problem. All of the articles by Joseph Brinkman and others dealt with the impending and the current crisis associated. Because medicinal plants like rhodiola don't have legs that they can climb up the mountainside as things get warmer and climb up to colder climates. They can't. They're really at risk. We dealt with and continue to deal with questions of history and ethnobotany. This cover of Herbalgram 27 it took me 3 years to get permission from the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City to use this Diego Rivera image, which is a big frieze. It's a big, and this is just the part that deals with the herbal medicine of the traditional medicine of Mexico. It took me 3 years to get permission, because they're going to get back to me mañana. Mañana is a very porous and fluid. I mean, you and I, here mañana means tomorrow. In some cultures, mañana means later, man. What's your hurry? It's like in India, we have this cosmology of circular, linear time, and over there it's circular time, and that's why if you're in a hurry to get to a movie, you don't stop at the Indian restaurant for dinner, unless it's a buffet. All right. At any rate, so we did this great article on the Badianos manuscript, the first medical book in the New World, based on the Codex Badiano in 1552, I believe it was, or 1553. I have a reprint of this. Dealing with medicinal plant, this is Stephen King from formerly of Shaman Pharmaceuticals. Now they're called Napo and Jaguar Pharmaceuticals. One of the few companies that have been successful with the US FDA to get a botanical drug approval from their sap of the Croton leclerri tree, the Sangre de Drago, that they are growing sustainably in Peru. Here's a cover story on Tibetan medicine, traditional medicine. Here's a cover story about the work that Wade Davis did about the work of the famous botanist from Harvard, Richard Evans Schultes, and his work. And here's something I want to share about Schultes. I'm sure Chris knows this, and maybe you too, Bill. I don't know the rest of you. Schultes was like 6'4". He was a tall Boston Brahmin that schlepped cans of Boston beans throughout the Amazon in the 30s. He was sent by the U.S. government to go to the Amazon in the 30s and 40s looking for alternative rubber sources because the government was concerned that rubber coming out of Indonesia and the Far East would be cut off if the Japanese geopolitically got into, which they did eventually, and we needed rubber for military and transportation and national defense purposes. They were looking in the Amazon for sources of rubber. And in the process, he found all these plants that were psychoactive and stuff, and some 200 plants or more that were unknown to science at the time. But Schultes was this tall guy. And most of the indigenous people of the Amazon tend to be relatively short. Chris mentioned that last night. Some of them are like 5 feet or less. Schultes shot his photos with a 1927 Rolleiflex camera. And a Rolleiflex camera was like, you look down, you carry it on a lanyard around your neck, and it's at your chest level, right by your pectoral or below. And so when you're shooting like this, not like this. So the photography is not Schultes at 6'4" looking down on these people. The photography is the camera, just the way the technology was done at peer level. And it's implicit in Schultes' photography, and it wasn't intended this way. It's just it was the camera that he had. He looks right in the eyes of the people at their level. And that's implicit in his photography. Just interesting point that Wade Davis points out that most of us had never thought about if we know Schultes' photography. Just something worth noting. So we really honor the rich traditions from all over the world, except for Antarctica, of how people have used medicinal plants. Jim Duke and I wanted to put out a book. One of the things on my list of things I wish I had done that never got around to, Jim Duke and I were going to do this book called Medicinal Plants and Ethnobotany of Antarctica. And you open it up and it's blank. It's like the book What Men Know About Women, and you open it up and it's all blank, you know. We were going to do that, and it was kind of a joke book, and give them away as premiums for membership in ABC. Kind of. You get it, Larry. We did a lot of work on African medicinal plants. We've done work on the history of herbs, etc. Herbs in Tibet. The point is that we're constantly doing stories that feature the ethnobotany of other cultures around the world as ways not just for herbalists to appreciate, but other people as well. Physicians, pharmacists, nurses, dietitians, scientists, everyone should know or have access to the knowledge about the wonderful rich use of medicinal plants around the world. We've also, back in the day, were leaders in regulatory. We don't focus on that now. But at the time, in the 80s and 90s, we were leaders in communicating what was going on about the regulatory. Here's Herbalgram number 2 in 1983 and 84. And this was about a very important court case 10 years before the passage of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act that basically the industry won against the FDA. The Famali Herb Company sued the FDA because the FDA said you cannot file GRAS for Schizandra and some of these Chinese herbs because there's no history of use in the United States of their safe use. Well, the law never said in the United States. It was FDA's very narrow, restrictive, limited interpretation that would rule out the safety of foreign herbal products if that were allowed to stand. And the Famali Company, and it was called Famali because that was the name of their cat, So they named their company the Famali Company. These are little anecdotes that'll never be known in the history books. The Famali Company sued the FDA, the HHS, Health and Human Services, because said the law never said in the United States. That's a very restrictive, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with them and said, FDA, you have to open up your interpretation. It's too narrow, which opened up the floodgates, so to speak, or narrowly, for industry to bring in botanicals without FDA saying that you can't show that this is unsafe, this is safe, based on Chinese or Indian data, because now you can. And this is 10 years before the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act created an infrastructure legally for herbs to come in and be able to be sold safely, but also with claims, which is another level of how the industry started expanding and exploding at that time. But this was a key issue. But nobody really understood the significance of this, and I'm grateful that we had the foresight to make it our cover story, such as our cover story was in Herbalgram #2. You can see this was typed out on a Selectric typewriter. If you ever remember the IBM Selectric typewriters with the little balls, right? So we would cover stuff about what's happening. Lauren Israelson and Bob Pinko. Bob Pinko was the former director of the Food and Drug Administration's over-the-counter drug review. They said, FDA said, well, these are drugs. These are not foods. If you guys want to bring these in and sell these, you have to get drug approval. So they took two of the herbs that were the most safe and had some of the best clinical research, ginger and I think valerian. And they did the European American Phytomedicines Coalition, a group of European phytomedicines company, and Nature's Way and a few companies in the United States. And they petitioned the FDA, look, here's our data on ginger and valerian. We want you to open up the over-the-counter drug monograph for nighttime sleep aid, valerian, and for motion sickness, ginger. And here's our data. And the FDA never responded. So they tried with two of the best candidates that had at that time some of the best literature. They tried to go the over-the-counter drug route, which FDA was saying, this is again before DSHEA was passed. This is 1992, 31 years ago. FDA was saying, no, these are drugs. These are drugs. You can't sell them as supplements. And yet when they tried to go the drug route, FDA just sat there and did not respond. They never have formally responded 31 years later. So that's why a year later, Senator Orrin Hatch introduced what he called at the time the Health Freedom Bill that would have created a safe haven for herbs as dietary supplements, a new term, or food supplement was the term back then. We chose the word dietary because it's hard to prove that echinacea and golden seal are foods, but people take them dietarily because they're on the lazy Susan at the breakfast table with the one-a-day vitamins. So they're dietarily intake, and that's where the word dietary supplement came from, whereas in Europe they still use the word food supplement. That's the term of art in Europe. And we said, we herbal people said, we can't use the word food because they're going to cleave us off in a few minutes. You know, how are they going to prove that echinacea is a food or golden seal is a food? Not in my house, it's not. Ginger, yeah. Golden seal, no. Garlic, yeah. Ginseng, yeah. These were foods. Echinacea and golden seal, no, etc. You get the point. This is seminal stuff. I won't get bogged down, but in 2000, because of this is an unregulated industry. You guys are an unregulated industry. We published an article by Bill Solar at the time, who was the head of scientific affairs at what is now the Consumer Health Products Association, which is the over-the-counter drug industry. And he wrote an article from the over-the-counter drug industry. It was intentional on my part to ask him to write this, because showing that these are regulated. And then 12 years later, I got him and Holly Bain, who is a leading herb and supplement industry attorney, who was in the supplement industry and then went to law school. So she came to law as a supplement believer and educator. She worked for Rainbow Light, Holly did. and she's a top attorney in this field, they co-wrote a much expanded article by 2012 showing all the different authorities that the U.S. government has to regulate herbs and supplements and how they are regulated, to help dispel the myth that these are an unregulated industry. And we have given this article out to dozens and dozens of reporters and other people and government officials who, so now they don't say that it's an unregulated industry. They say underregulated industry. They still have their bias, but at least they can't say it's unregulated. So anyway, there's Jim Duke talking about the botanical alternative, and it's Jim early on showing what herbs can be used as alternatives to conventional pharmaceutical prescription drugs. And this is important seed information. We're showing people that there's a place for herbal medicine in modern healthcare. And Dr. Tyler, same thing. Then he was focusing on the clinically tested phytomedicines of Europe. And this is coming from Professor Vero Tyler, who for 20 years was the dean of the School of Pharmacy at Purdue University and the senior author of 6 editions, I believe, or 5 or 6 editions of the textbook on pharmacognosy, and became a board member of ABC after he retired. And we help show what's going on in the media. Again, Dr. Jay Rosen is quoted in NBC or CBS News saying he uses echinacea for kids who have eustachian tube problems in their ears. Here's a Los Angeles pediatrician using echinacea. And instead of operations on kids for eustachian tubes and their inner ear problems, he's actually using echinacea successfully, according to him. To us, that's worthy of an article back in the day when not very little of this was happening. So we promoted Herbalgram as much as we could back in the day. We promoted note cards on what's going on with herbs. We had all kinds of ways we try to communicate to people. Note cards with Stephen Foster photographs. Thousands of people were sending out note cards and get well cards with herbal information and ethnobotany on the back. We were involved with the World Health Organization in 1990 on developing their guidelines for the assessment of herbal medicines. And sometimes we would even get very esoteric, for example, looking at the glandular parts of volatile plant where the essential oils are made through scanning electron microscopy at 750 to 1250 times power. Just fun stuff to look at, just interesting. And Paul Stamets's work back in the day about mushrooms. And, Paul, who's an amazing fungophile, who has had a species named after him recently. Psilocybe stametsii, isn't it? Or psilocybe, which one is it? Yeah, Psilocybe stametsii. Got to give him credit for that. A South American species of psilocybe producing mushroom, named for Paul Stamets. Good luck, good for you, Paul. So let's talk about dietary supplements in the last few minutes that we have, and the issue of quality, and the question about authenticity. Are all these things actually what they claim to be? Now, this is from Parade Magazine, Sunday Supplement. Come on. So, back in the late 1970s, there were a group of people selling stuff in health food stores called Wild Red American Ginseng. It was a total fraud. It was Rumex hymenocephalus in the dock family, the Polygonaceae. It grew in New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, nowhere near where Panax quinquefolius grows. It contains 20 to 40% tannin in the roots. It's not ginseng. Great for sore throats, one of the traditional uses. I produced and published, as when I was president of the Herb Trade Association, our policy statement number 1, saying this stuff is fraudulent, it's not what it is. And we went to health food stores and health food conventions, which then was the only place you could buy herbs. There was no internet, it was very little on mail order. It wasn't in the mass market. This is where it was sold in the health food stores. We got the health food stores to stop selling Wild Red American Ginseng. So that was my first iteration or first opportunity to try to clean up the market, and that was 1979. That was fun. Economic adulteration of echinacea in Herbalgram in 1985, talking about adulteration with Parthenium. This was unheard of by most people in the industry at the time. And we talked about Herbalgram number 2, volume 3, 1985, in our second year of Herbalgram, the substitution of germander in so-called skullcap. And this was problematic because germander is hepatotoxic. It's known to be hepatotoxic. Teucrium commideris or Teucrium canadensis, the two different species. But certain products were being reported in liver toxicity. They were hops, valerian, and skullcap. The skullcap wasn't skullcap, it was germander. And still to this day, in certain adverse event reporting and toxicology listservs, you can find that hops and valerian are reported to be hepatotoxic, not because they're hepatotoxic, not because they have any reports of it, but they were in naturopathic type formulations in the 70s that contained skullcap as well, and the skullcap wasn't skullcaps, it was germander. I talked about this at a pharmacovigilance conference at Kew Gardens in London 2 months ago. Back in the 1980s, there was this stuff being sold in little pills, little bitty balls from China, from Hong Kong, and people were buying them for rheumatoid arthritis, inflammation, pain, and they were getting results, and they were buying it from health food stores in the Southwest. We worked with the Texas Department of Health to expose that this stuff had been tested to contain phenylbutazone and other undeclared prescription drugs. And we were the first to utilize the terminology that is now utilized by the trade associations and the Food and Drug Administration when you see these spiked reports of these spiked herbal products or supplements that really contain prescription drugs that are not disclosed. We talk about prescription drugs masquerade as Chinese arthritis formula. We were the first to use, back in 1990, the term masquerading, because I was just called by a reporter from England last week. What about the prescription drugs being used in sexual products that are sexual herbal products? I said, that's not an herbal product. It's an illegal drug masquerading as a dietary supplement. Because that's what it is. And the terminology needs to be clear. We don't call those supplements. We don't call those herbal products. They're illegal drugs that the formulators, that the marketers are illegally masquerading. Back in the 1990s, we, American Botanical Council, through an analytical method we developed at University of Illinois, Chicago, and University of Ottawa, which today is the USP method for ginseng. We tested 500 ginseng products in North America to determine if they were accurately labeled and contained ginseng. Nobody in the world has ever tested that many products on anything to this date. It took us 4 or 5 years to do it. We published part of that in the standardized testing part of this. After 9/11 happened, our funding dried up and we couldn't publish the rest of it. But we started this process of actually looking at the market for fraud. And the bottom line was about 25% of the ginseng products were either mislabeled or adulterated, not what they claimed to be. We report through our Herb Market Report every year, which is one of our most widely cited publications, what the growth of the market is. The Herbalgram Herbal Market Report, here's the one for 2021, 9.7% increase. And every year for 20 years, it's been growing. This last year in 22, we'll probably show a plateauing because things have leveled off after the pandemic. But in the mainstream market, and in a minute I'll show you the health food market, these are the top 22 best-selling herbs. The ones in yellow are herbs that we have confirmed are subject to adulteration. I'm not saying they're all adulterated, and let's get clear about this. I'm not saying they're adulterated. I say they're subject to adulteration. Here is the mass market, some of the very same herbs in different ranking of priority and popularity in the health food market. The bottom line is this. The first statistic is the mass. The second statistic is the health food market, just from those 22 that I showed you from the 2021 market report, the last year we have data. 36% to 55% respectively are subject to adulteration of the most popular 22 herbs, based on those two preceding slides. Then the question is, okay, we know they're subject to adulteration. There's cheating and fraud going on. How much adulteration is really out there? That's the question. One of the questions. And the answer is we don't know. So right now we're working on an extensive paper where we're taking 5 of the most popular herbs in the marketplace that we know are adulterated, looking at all the data, because sometimes somebody will do a report on 12 products or 15 products or 35 products. Where did they get those products? Were they from Amazon? Were they on the internet from other sources? Were they from the health food store? Were they from a physician? Were they from mass market? Or all the above? Did they make an attempt to fully replicate and reflect the market? In most cases, no. They just took enough that they would have some significance statistically, but they don't necessarily represent the market. And the question is, what is the reflection on the market? We don't know. And this paper that we're working on is an attempt to try to take the 5 popular herbs that we know are adulterated and try to figure out an algorithm, a process, a procedure of how to approach. How do we know what extent of the adulteration that we know is happening, how much is out there? Because some people say, well, there's only a little adulteration. This is really a solution looking for a problem. Not so much, really. If there's adulteration going on, that's a problem. If I'm going to go out and buy herb X, Y, or Z for my family or for my daughter or for my wife, I want to know I can rely that the label is accurate and reflects what is in the bottle or the box or the can or whatever it is. It's about identity, authenticity. There's fraud going on in the marketplace. We know that. People have cheated. So almost 13 years ago, I started a program called the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program. And I invited my good friend Roy Upton of the American Pharmacopoeia to join us, and my dear friend Nicholas Kahn, the director of the National Center for Natural Products Research at the University of Mississippi, a Food and Drug Administration funded center of excellence for the analysis of herbal dietary ingredients and herbal supplements and the development of analytical methods to test. It's an FDA center. Now, we all know we don't want to see adulteration. So I've been involved with this for a long time, as I pointed out to you.
Is that you?
This is a... Yes, it is. Yes, it is. You see the... Last September, I had the honor of being invited to the celebration of life of Olivia Newton-John, who was a dear friend, and her husband, Amazon John Easterling, is a dear friend. I was invited. And I'm out there, and I see John Travolta there. So I teed up on my iPhone that photo. And I went up to him and explained to him that I had been in the herb business, still involved, friend of John's. And this is a poster that I had made in May of 1980 to knock off John Travolta from this poster where he is actually with the Lone Star Beer. I got a bottle of Ginseng Rush in my hand. And I had the sign made for Katz's because he was at Gillies and I had to be at the Jewish Delicatessen, of course. That's the other joke. This is May 1980. And my daughter says I should put this on my tombstone. My daughter says, John Travolta looks at this and he looks at me, he goes, "You're a lot cuter than I was." This is a global problem, this question of adulteration. It happens all over the world. And there's always a bad apple in the barrel. The problem is there's lots and lots of barrels. They're all over the place. And yet there's many companies that are owned and or managed by ethical, responsible people who care about the quality and the authenticity of the ingredients that they're putting into consumer products, and they even also care about the experience that their customer is having with their product, whether they're putting the stuff in their mouth or putting it on their skin. There are people who care. And then there's the rest of them out there. So when we use the word adulteration, by the way, we're talking about the intentional concealment of a substitution or dilution or removal of some valuable ingredient and or insertion of a fraudulent ingredient to the economic gain of the seller, to the economic detriment of the buyer, and sometimes to the health detriment of the buyer. Because fortunately, most of the things that we have tested are not, or have reviewed the tests on, I should say, are not posing a public health problem. They're not safety issues. Except for germander and a few others, most of these are economic violations. The health issue becomes one about if they don't work, and people are using them in lieu of potentially other drugs that might have been useful and maybe recommended by a physician, but instead people are taking herbs instead because they expect them to work based on the published trials on some other product. So people have always had a certain idea about what's in a product, right? And so our first publication of our program was I wanted to let people know that adulteration and fraud is not new. Adulteration and fraud doesn't just happen out of our industry. It's been going on for several thousand years and beyond. And this article by Stephen Foster, our first in our series of 80 peer-reviewed publications so far for the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program, deals with a brief history of the adulteration of herbs, spices, and botanical drugs going back to Greco-Roman times. And we have the evidence from the literature. This is why they started the Pharmacopoeia, to help establish identity methods. One of the first ones, the ash test. You burn the plant material and to see how much stuff is left over that's inorganic, like the sand that was in the cinnamon or whatever, to add to the weight. And again, one of our first publications in Herbalgram before we started our series of bulletins was germander and the adulteration of skullcap, because germander is hepatotoxic. And a shout out to my good friend, Dr. Stefan Gaffner, the Chief Science Officer of ABC. The bad news is he's been demoted and he's the new director of the adulterants program. That's a demotion because now he has to deal with budgets and HR and all those things that directors have to deal with, not just science. That's why I call it a demotion. I'm still involved. I'm no longer the director. I'm just the flounder. So this is all the publications we published last year alone. These are our peer-reviewed publications last year under Stefan's editorship. We have lots of bulletins, and here's all the bulletins we've published so far. The first two columns, 26 bulletins confirming adulteration. The red means elderberry. In a few weeks, we're going to publish our elderberry bulletin. We're the first organization to ever publish a scientifically peer-reviewed article confirming adulteration on elderberry. There's nothing in the scientific literature before our publication in Herbalgram in 2021. And I'm not proud about that, by the way. I'm sorry to say that elderberry is being adulterated, especially after the huge amount of demand that's out there. It takes 3 or 4 years to elderberry to fruit. You can't plant elderberry knowing there's a huge consumer interest here and have it available in the fall to harvest. It doesn't work that way. Ashwagandha, maybe a year or less. A lot of other stuff, you can get them in 3 to 6 months or whatever. Elderberry, 4 years. It's a long-term conversation. Ginseng, 4 to 6 years. So this is an outline of our bulletins. I won't get into all that. But in addition to our bulletins confirming adulteration based on other people's publications in the scientific literature, I said we should look at the lab methods. What's going on with the lab methods? And we're doing something that nobody in the world has done, and we're doing what was called laboratory guidance documents. We look at all the analytical laboratory methods. It's very wonky. It's very technological. It's very chemical, as well as dealing with DNA and other stuff, depending on the type of analytical methods. And we have published so far 15 analytical lab guidance documents with lavender oil coming out this summer. That's finished and peer-reviewed, coming out shortly. In other words, which methods work, which methods don't work, based on the adulteration that's going on today. The method you're using in your lab may have been published 20 or 30 years ago and may have been fine 20 or 30 years ago based on what was in the market then. But in the literature, there's a little C in front of the term GMP. CGMP stands for Current Good Manufacturing Practices. And the lab testing methods that you used 20 or 30 years ago may no longer be current to reflect the type of adulteration going on today. More on that in a second. We've published 80 peer-reviewed publications in the literature and on our website in the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program, and all of it is available for free to anybody in the world that can take it and use it and help set their specifications for their products. It's free access. Anybody can take it and use it. All we ask is you register. And it's underwritten by over 200 companies, organizations at all around the world that help support us. We have a newsletter that comes out 3 times a year dealing with all kinds of reports. Here's some examples of what we have. Here's saw palmetto. The first 4 are legitimate. Look at the last 4. They're kind of light. Those are not true saw palmetto. It's some kind of vegetable oil or palm oil. But what's worse, wait, there's more. In 2017, several papers were published on so-called saw palmetto, and they found that they contain essential fatty acids that are derived from chicken, beef, pork, and lamb. They're taking the fat from the animal from the slaughterhouse. They take it next door or across the street or down the road to a rendering plant where this fat is then broken down and fractionated and to different fatty acids. And then those fatty acids are recombined in the ratios stipulated in the United States Pharmacopoeia and the European Pharmacopoeia monographs for analytical confirmation that this is saw palmetto.
Oh.
As my father used to say, if you don't believe me now, I'll never lie to you again. But it's true. It's true. Turmeric, and I can show you lots of other examples. Turmeric extracts are being adulterated with synthetic curcuminoids. Synthetic curcuminoids. So, several years ago, we published our first of 2 papers this is in a horticultural journal, Botanical Ingredient Adulteration, How Some Suppliers Attempt to Fool Commonly Used Analytical Techniques. It's intentional. The adulteration is intentional. And the way they adulterate is intentional to try to fool a specific analytical method that the adulterators know are prevalent in the U.S. and European and other industries. And we've taken that paper and we've expanded it with more data now. And here it is, just published a few months ago in the Journal of Natural Products, one of the top peer-reviewed journals in the world on medicinal plant research. And here it is. And we paid them extra, like $5,000, to have that paper be in front of the firewall so that anybody in the world can download it for free and access it. Not that we have all this money, it's just that this is important to us. It doesn't make any sense to publish this stuff and have it sitting behind a firewall where you got to pay money to get to it because that's going to keep people from looking at it. We have to make it available, especially around the world. People are using our publications to set specifications for their ingredients, and in doing so, they find that their current suppliers cannot meet those specifications sometimes, and they have to change and upgrade their supplier. I'm almost finished. So these are the analytical methods, it's technical, that are being fooled for the specific herbs. This is a table from our paper showing which analytical methods are at risk or subject to compromise unless you use them as a group or in some other way, but specifically one by itself, the adulterators, the fraudsters, let's call them what they really are, the criminals. They're criminals. This is a crime. They're gaming the system by focusing on specific analytical methods used in government labs, industry labs, to try to identify the material and detect the adulteration. Again, as I mentioned before, most of what we've determined do not pose safety risks. This is not a safety public health issue from a safety perspective. It's about whether you're getting stuff that really works according to what you have read in a clinical trial somewhere or read about a clinical trial. But that is that's a public health issue. Because if the herbs don't work, people are not getting the benefit. Well, this is our paper again. One more thing, or two more things before I leave. We put together, I was putting together an article. Do I get 5 more minutes? We're putting together an article for Herbalgram about 5-6 years ago, and I said, and it's about what happens when a company receives something and they test it and they find that it's adulterated. What happens? Normally, they send it back to the supplier for credit or reshipment of some other material. Then what happens to the stuff? Anybody want to venture a guess what happens when they send it back to the supplier? Pardon? Goes to somebody else. Are you in the industry? You are? Are you one of the people that sends it to somebody else, or are you one of the buyers? Just kidding. Just kidding. That's exactly right. It's not a little kept secret. It goes to somebody else. We have people who've told us they've received barrels that have rejection stickers from the previous customer on them still. They didn't even repack the stuff. It's like Jay Leno's Stupid Criminals. Like the guys who robbed the 7-Eleven, and then in the police chase, they ran out of gas because they forgot to buy the gas first. Any rate, so we put together, instead of an article about this, we put together an SOP, a best practices standard operating procedure based on voluntary contracts that the buyer and the seller have that says, the buyer says, I'm the company going to manufacture a product from your ingredient, or ingredients plural. If you send me something that we agree at that lab over there, based on the lab method that we've both agreed to, the analytical method, and your stuff that you send me is either adulterated beyond my ability to recondition it under the law or have some third party recondition. If it can't be reconditioned, it's called irreparably defective. If it's irreparably defective and not reparably defective under the law, because things can be reconditioned. If it's that way and it's sitting in our quarantine section of our warehouse, we're not sending it back to you. We're not paying you. You owe us the extra money for the testing, and you owe us for the third-party certified company that's going to come pick it up and take it to the landfill or to the incinerator. In other words, burn it, don't return it. And this is our new SOP that we're proposing for industry, and we have a number of companies that are looking at it to consider endorsing it. We have companies that have already endorsed it, and we have trade associations that have already approved it and endorsed it as policy for their members. Because, unfortunately, there are people out there who cheat. And this is a way for industry members that are responsible to take control and be empowered, because the GMP rules, the good manufacturing rules, practice rules for the United States and other countries around the world, the British Herbal Medicine Association has endorsed this. They're silent on what to do if you get something that's irreparably defective. We've created a new term of art for the regulatory literature, irreparably defective. If it's reparable, fix it under the law. If it's just out of spec because it's the wrong color green, send it back for the different color green, whatever. But if it's irreparably defective or it's somehow contaminated in ways you can't fix it, even if it's from a reputable supplier, you have a responsibility to get it out of the supply chain so it doesn't end up in a consumer product somewhere. That's what this is about. So before I leave, one more thing. One more thing. We talk about sustainability. ABC in 2018 started the Sustainable Herbs Program. And the Sustainable Herbs Program is a beautiful website and a series of conversations and all kinds of projects and programs that have evolved over the last 5 years under the director of the wonderful woman, Anne Armbrecht, who has a PhD from Harvard in social anthropology, who started the SHP and came to us and asked us to take this on. And what we are doing is we're asking the question, do you know where your herbs come from? And do you know why it's important that you do know? And do you know who the people are that are part of that supply chain value network? That's the key term here. And what's going on? How sustainable is our industry? And how can we make it more sustainable? And how can we build lasting supply chain that are sustainable value networks? So we have a wonderful website. We put on 37, I think, free webinars that are available to anybody in the world, and they are on our website. Our webinars deal with the people-plant connection. It's about people and plants. We just published and are relaunching our Sustainability Toolkit 2.0. It's an 88-page document that any company, no matter where they are in the path towards sustainable practices or the path of sustainability, whether you're just starting, if you're way halfway down the road, if you're like traditional medicinals and you've been doing it for 20 years, they're using our toolkit. It's giving people references and resources on how to be more sustainable in a business. We just published this 21-minute video on Costa Rican farmers' support of, we should show it here, but how people are using regenerative agriculture to produce herbs and medicinal plants. In April, we just did a webinar for health professionals on why they should be more interested in sustainability and understand that sustainability issues affects their ability to continue accessing some of the herbs and herbal products they're relying on and utilizing. We have this learning journey for our supporters that's coming up in Appalachia, in this area, coming up in September. I want to do a shout out. These are not just ABC supporters. These are the actual underwriters, the inaugural underwriters of the Sustainable Herbs Program. A shout out to these 17 groups, including UNPA and other ones that have come on since. And a great book, which I encourage you to read if you're interested in this conversation, is Anne Armbrecht's wonderful book on the business of botanicals, where she talks about the evolution of the herb industry over the last 50 years and who are the companies and who are the people that do it. And one more thing that we do in Herbalgram that I haven't mentioned yet. We're all getting older. We're aging. And aging has its effects on us. We have gravity to deal with. We have all kinds of things that are going on with our bodies and our minds. And then there's this one, if you like a little dark humor here. Okay, so one of the things that people tell me they love about Herbalgram is when they get it in the mail, the first thing they do sometimes is they go to the back and they look at the memorials. So just in closing, what I want to do is honor very quickly some of our sisters and brothers who have left us in the last year and a half or so. Because it's important for us to recognize that we are an interweb community of people. Often we know each other through wonderful opportunities and conferences like this. We have these opportunities to know people through their communications because they write books or they write articles, or we heard a webinar of theirs. And these are people who've dedicated their lives to supporting what we love, which is the herbs and the plants and the fungi and the biosphere that we grow up in. I feel honored to have met Champ in Memphis 30 years ago. The first black pharmacist working in a hospital in Memphis. And looked at his store. Champion's Pharmacy and Herb Store. He was the center of his community when it came to healing. And I could tell you a story about probably 15 out of the 18 people I'm showing you because I knew them, fortunately. One of the nice things about being in this field is we get to know our brothers and sisters. And there's some wonderful people that are incredible. And if you haven't read her book, I encourage you, read this book beside Anne Armbrecht's book, because Barbara Griggs gives us the development of Western medicine from the herbal perspective. Amazing woman. And if you like to read, you should read Peter Gorman, the first guy to write about ayahuasca in North America, I believe back in '86 it was. Wrote for High Times Magazine. And my dear friend Paul Lee. If it weren't for Paul Lee, I probably never would have started the American Botanical Council. Paul Lee introduced me to Jim Duke, Norman Farnsworth, Vero Tyler, Walter Lewis, John Staba, all the different a lot of the herbal professors and researchers I met through Paul Lee, who was there at Harvard as one of the co-editors of the Psychedelic Review with Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and Ralph Netzner. And Paul Lee was the fourth editor of the Psychedelic Review in the 1960s at Harvard. Rex's mom started Forever Living. If anybody's into cannabis, Rafi, he's the guy that basically helped elucidate the chemistry and pharmacology of THC and CBD. The world's premier researcher, Dick Passwater, and Charles Wambabi. There's more than I can do. But right here in North Carolina, a tip of the hat to my old friend Ken Wilcox in Boone, North Carolina. Ken was one of the old line herb traders going back a long way. And Dr. Shi. And I mentioned his name before because he and his wife owned the Famali Herb Company, Ben Zarakor, who successfully sued the FDA in the Famali case. He's the guy that paid for all that. So I said ABC is in 81 countries. A quick shout out to Lauren Isberson, Kenneth Murdoch, Jan Komps, and Anton Graf, who are the ones who got me the first check so I could start the American Botanical Council. These are the guys who put up the money so I could start ABC, the first $25,000, so I could get letterhead and a fax machine. These are the guys. And these are the first board members of ABC beside myself: Jim Duke, Norman Farnsworth, and Vero Tyler. And I got some breaking news. ABC is going to be launching soon our new YouTube network, Herb TV, where we're going to be putting out our own videos, ABC videos, SHP videos, hopefully videos from Chris, who's generously supported us, and videos from others. We're working with Rosemary to get some of her videos, and we're aggregating herbal videos from various sources in our new channel called Herb TV. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. Linnea and Larry, thank you for including me. And thanks for supporting ABC and Herbal Ground.